Om Namo Narayana, welcome back. We are in the last third of Canto 4. This is chapter 22. Prthu Maharaja's meeting with the four Kumaras. We're just going to be starting this chapter today, not concluding it. Also, as in earlier videos, mind any sounds that you may hear, rushing noises. I happen to have the window open. It's a rather warm day, and when I record these videos and the window's closed, you can probably see my energy just start to crash and the sweat appear, because I have to turn off any fans or anything, and alas, this is not a recording studio. Here we go. So the great sage Maharaja said, while the citizens were thus praying to the most powerful king Prthu, the four Kumaras, who were as bright as the sun, arrived on the spot. Seeing the glowing effulgence of the four Kumaras, the masters of all mystic powers, the king and his associates could recognize them as descended from the sky. Seeing the four Kumaras, Maharaja Prthu was greatly anxious to receive them. Therefore the king, with all his officers, very hastily got up, as anxiously as a conditioned soul whose senses are immediately attracted by the modes of material nature. When the great sages accepted their reception, according to the instructions of the Shastras, and finally took their seats offered by the king, influenced by the glories of the sages, immediately bowed down. Thus he worshipped the four Kumaras. After this, the king took the water which had washed the lotus feet of the Kumaras and sprinkled it over his hair. By such respectful actions, the king, as an exemplary personality, showed how to receive a spiritually advanced personality. The four great sages were elder to Lord Shiva, and when they were seated on the golden throne, they appeared just like a fire blazing on the altar. Prthu, out of his great gentleness and respect for them, began to speak with great restraint as follows. My dear great sages, auspiciousness personified, it is very difficult for even the mystic yogis to see you. Indeed, you are very rarely seen. I do not know what kind of pious activities I perform for you to grace me by appearing before me without difficulty. Any person upon whom the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas are pleased can achieve anything which is very rare to obtain in this world as well as after death. Not only that, but one also receives the favor of the auspicious Lord Shiva and Lord Vishnu, which accompany the Brahmanas and Vaishnavas. Although you are traveling in all the planetary systems, people cannot know you, just as they cannot know the Supersoul, although he is within everyone's heart as the witness of everything. Even Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva cannot understand the Supersoul. A person who is not very rich and is attracted to family life becomes highly glorified when saintly persons are present in his home. The master and servants who are engaged in offering the exalted visitors water, a sitting place, and paraphernalia for reception are glorified, and the home itself is also glorified. On the contrary, even though full of all opulence and material prosperity, any householder's house where the devotees of the Lord are never allowed to come in, and where there is no water for washing their feet, is to be considered a tree in which all venomous serpents live. Maharaja Prthu thus offered his welcome to the four Kumaras, addressing them as the best of the Brahmanas. He welcomed them, saying additionally, from the beginning of your birth you strictly observe the vows of celibacy, and although you are experienced in the path of liberation, you are keeping yourselves just like small children. Maharaja Prthu inquired from the sages about persons entangled in this dangerous material existence because of their previous actions. Could such persons whose only aim is sense gratification be blessed with any good fortune? He asked, my good sirs, there is no need to ask about your good and bad fortune, because you are always absorbed in spiritual bliss. The mental concoction of the auspicious and inauspicious does not exist within you. I am completely assured that personalities like you are the only friends for persons who are blazing in the fire of material existence. I therefore ask you how, in this material world, we can very soon achieve the ultimate goal of life. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is always anxious to elevate the living entities, who are his parts and parcels, and for their special benefit the Lord travels all over the world in the form of self-realized persons like you. Thus, Sanata Kumara, the best of the celibates, after hearing the speech of Maharaja Prthu, which was meaningful, appropriate, full of precise words, and very sweet to hear, smiled with full satisfaction, and began to speak as follows. He said, "My dear King Prthu, I am very nicely questioned by you. Such questions are beneficial for all living entities, especially because they are raised by you, who are always thinking of the good of others. Although you know everything, you ask such questions because that is the behavior of saintly persons. Such intelligence is befitting your position. When there is a congregation of devotees, their discussions, questions, and answers become conclusive to both the speaker and the audience. Thus such a meeting is beneficial for everyone's real happiness. My dear King, you already have an inclination to glorify the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such attainment is very difficult to achieve, but when one has attained such unflinching faith in the Lord, it automatically cleanses lusty desires from the core of the heart. It has been conclusively decided in the Scriptures, after due consideration, that the ultimate goal for the welfare of human society is detachment from the bodily concept of life, and increased and steadfast attachment for the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental beyond the modes of material nature. Attachment for the Supreme can be increased by practicing devotional service, inquiring about the Lord, applying bhakti yoga in life, worshipping the Yogeshvara, the Lord, and by hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These actions are pious in themselves. One has to make progress in spiritual life by not associating with persons who are simply interested in sense gratification and making money. Not only such persons, but one who associates with such persons should be avoided. One should mold his life in such a way that he cannot live in peace without drinking the nectar of the glorification of the Lord Hari. One can be thus elevated by being disgusted with the taste for sense enjoyment. A candidate for spiritual advancement must be non-violent, must follow in the footsteps of great acharyas, must always remember the nectar of the pastimes of the Lord, and must follow the regulative principles without material desire, and while following the regulative principles should not blaspheme others. A devotee should lead a very simple life and not be disturbed by the duality of opposing elements. He should learn to tolerate them. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constantly hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Lord. These pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence of the Lord. Upon becoming fixed in this attachment to the Lord, by the grace of the spiritual master, and by awakening knowledge and attachment, the living entity situated within the heart of the body and covered by the 5 elements burns up his material surroundings exactly as fire, arising from wood, burns the wood itself. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When the dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. When the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to designations. But when one is in the transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others, just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. When one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on false foundations. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. For human society, constantly thinking of how to earn money and apply it for sense gratification brings about the destruction of everyone's interests. When one becomes devoid of knowledge and devotional service, he enters into species of life like those of trees and stones. For those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nescience must not associate with the modes of ignorance, for hedonistic activities are the greatest obstructions to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, and at last liberation. Out of the four principles, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by the stringent law of nature, that being death. We accept as blessings different states of higher life, distinguishing them from lower states of life, but we should know that such distinctions exist only in relation to the interchange of the modes of material nature. Actually, these states of life have no permanent existence, for all of them will be destroyed by the Supreme Controller. Therefore, my dear King Prthu, try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living within everyone's heart along with the individual soul, in each and every body, either moving or not moving. The individual souls are fully covered by the gross material body and subtle body made of the life, air, and intelligence. The Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests himself as one with the cause and effect within this body, but one who has transcended the illusory energy by deliberate consideration, which clears the misconception of a snake for a rope, can understand that the Paramatma is eternally transcendental to the material creation and situated in pure internal energy. Thus the Lord is transcendental to all material contamination. Unto him only must one surrender. The devotees who are always engaged in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities. Because this is very difficult, the non-devotees, although trying to stop the ways of sense gratification, cannot do so. Therefore, you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. The ocean of nescience is very difficult to cross because it is infested with many dangerous sharks. Although those who are non-devotees undergo severe austerities and penances to cross that ocean, we recommend that you simply take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, which are like boats for crossing the ocean. Although the ocean is difficult to cross, by taking shelter of his lotus feet, you will overcome all dangers. We shall pause here. That's verse 40. Essentially, very much a summary of what we've heard before, and instructions for life as laid down by one of the Kumaras. If you read anything by ISKCON, Swami Prabhupada, or other Swamis who have written since he passed from the mortal plane, you're probably very, very familiar with everything we've just read. It's verbatim the goal of ISKCON, and for those who join ISKCON and become sannyasis and follow that path, this is very much the teaching that they put forth. Though it does lead me to a translation question. How much of this is actually the Srimad Bhagavatam, and how much of this is Swami Prabhupada kind of tweaking things to reflect his own situation? whenever he translated this in the late 60s, early 70s. There was one line here that that thought came to me. It was verse 24, something. It says, must follow the regulative principles. Well, that term regulative principles is seen in the writings of Swami all the time. He often talks about we must follow these regulative principles. We must follow Krishna consciousness with these regulative principles. And all the teachers in ISKCON also teach this. This is just one of the foundation teachings. But I wonder, is that the term used in the Srimad Bhagavatam? I don't know. This is a very open-ended question. It's a very serious question. I'm not necessarily picking this apart. I'm just kind of looking for the actual words. What is this phrase in the Sanskrit? What did the writer of the Srimad Bhagavatam write? Is it regulated principles? Or is this a modern word that he's putting on something? The reason I ask this is this modern word actually slightly changing the meaning of what was originally meant? That's always a fear of mine, that we're following something that has been twisted, and thus we're not going closer to the light. We're actually going away from the light because we're not following the truth. We're following a variation of the truth. I have that same criticism for many religions, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, whatever the religion. I always say, are we following the truth or are we following a modern interpretation? Open-ended questions, answers are welcomed. I'm going to keep this video short and not say much more. I'm kind of hitting the limit that I like for these videos, but I think also the chapter was pretty much very self-explanatory. And like I said, if you're in ISKCON, you've looked at these things and seen these things and discussed them many times. But if you would like to pick up a discussion that you've had elsewhere or start one here, you know how. Please do down below. And next time we'll finish up the last 20 chapters or so. Sorry. 20 verses or so in the Srimad Bhagavatam. I hope this isn't 20 more chapters. Alright. Until next time, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.